So hello and greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. My name is Abra Bush and I serve as the Senior Associate Dean here at Peabody. I'm delighted you could join us today for our conversation on diversity and anti-racism in the conservatory sector. Before we get started, I want to thank the tireless staff members from Peabody who join us on each and every one of these events that make it happen. Without these hardworking folks, there's no chance that we could have done this series from Peabody this year. Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team will be in the background monitoring the webinar and working through any technical challenges we may have. Please send comments directly to Adam if you have technical issues. Anna Harris from the Concert and Ensemble Office will provide additional back of the house support, and Christina Mancior from Peabody's Launchpad is here to help me curate your questions. A huge thanks to all of them, as well as to our marketing team who has supported these endeavors for the last year. A few quick notes before we begin. If you would, please hop into the chat and introduce yourselves to both the panelists and the attendees. We'd love to know who's here, where you're from, and we hope you'll consider this an interactive session with one another. The presenters will spend about half of their time presenting, after which we'll reserve the remainder of the time for questions and comments from you. Please place your questions into the Q&A area of the webinar so that we can easily find them and curate them. The presenters have agreed to allow us to record this webinar. And as always, the session will be posted to the Peabody Keep Teaching website within just a few days and sent to all of you electronically who registered for this event. So stay tuned. So without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome our guest presenters for today. Their bios are all available on our website. I will just quickly go through who they are and their titles, but I do encourage you to take a look at their full bios on the website. First, I want to welcome my colleague, Dr. Carl DuPont. He is Assistant Professor of Voice, Co-Chair of Peabody's Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, and also co-chair of Peabody's culturally responsive curriculum task force. I clearly haven't had enough coffee today. Carl, thanks for joining us. Dr. Derek Gay is a friend and a diversity and inclusion strategist and consultant who has worked in the field now for more years than he'd like to admit. He is old, but I'm grateful to Derek, who is a considerable figure in this field, for joining us today on this call. In addition, Dr. Joyce Griggs is Executive Vice Provost and President at the Manhattan School of Music, and Christina Salgado is Director for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, or EBID initiatives at the Juilliard School. Welcome to all of you. So as we get started today, I want to first turn to our colleagues at Peabody, Manhattan, and Juilliard, and hear what it is they are doing in each of their respective institutions. Carl, could you take it away from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Abra. So I joined the Peabody Institute approximately 2 years ago. And since then, it has been a lot of fun, but also, as you all know, with the pandemic, somewhat of a wild ride. So with my first slide, it's just a title slide. Just giving you an idea of what I do. So I'm here at the Peabody Institute and also the Carey School of Business. And the next slide, please. All right, so as co-chair of the Culturally Responsive Curriculum Task Force, here I've outlined some of the steps that we are undertaking so that you all can see how we're undergoing this process, and maybe that could spark some ideas for you as well. Our first goal was to empathize with stakeholders across the Institute. So that included other faculty members and students about their experience in the conservatory. We wanted to define what cultural relevance is and how it can be integrated into the curriculum at Peabody. And I think that is a very rich discussion that we'll have a little more of today in working with definitions and terms. We evaluated our curricular offerings across the field and also in our institution, looking for best practices. And then we used that to generate some ideas around how we could implement that type of coursework into our school with research and as well as programming. We solicited feedback on those ideas, and our next step is to actually test them and calibrate them, understanding that these concepts will need some adjustments as we go along, and that we want to continually be responsive to that. Next slide, please. So I am also on our Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. And here we have a shared governance structure in order to model the type of leadership that we'd like to see around the university, but also the world. So our main goal is to foster an environment of belonging for all students and faculty. And in order to do that, we are advancing a transparent and strategic action plan focused on human resources, so our faculty makeup, assessment and accountability, inclusive practices to prevent inequity, and building cultural awareness. We're also hosting community conversations, and this year has given us a lot of impetus to do this because events keep happening where we need to talk about what this means for us as a community, the most recent being the shootings in Atlanta, which targeted Asian women in particular. And finally, we will review and make recommendations for revisions to Peabody's primary policies, practices, and procedures in alignment with the ADEI vision. Next slide, please. So my main area is voice. And interestingly enough, when I took this position at Peabody, a colleague who I was singing with at the time, he said to me, "You know, Carl, I think you might be the only Black male voice professor at a conservatory." And I said, "No, that can't be the case." So then I started to look around and try to find, and it is a very small group of Black male voice teachers in the country, but at the legacy conservatories, there were none. And I'm excited that Juilliard is hiring my mentor and friend, Kevin Short, and Larry Brownlee to join the faculty in the fall. But then that makes 3. So I think that really underscores the type of urgency that's needed in this area. So with my expertise as a voice teacher, I try to support the full expression, self-expression, through the science and art of singing of each individual student. I assign an inclusive repertoire to all students at all levels. I find that the model is often, we must start with these 400-year-old Italian songs, and then we can go to these 200-year-old German songs, and then we can check out these 100-year-old French songs, and then perhaps we can do a song that's closer to home. And I think that that model is a little bit twisted, and so I'm endeavoring to help students discover what is around them and the music that's actually underneath their feet and in the environment around them. I also teach an art song by Black composers course. Now, originally, this was an art song by African American composers course, but we have expanded that this year, and we are including Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who has written, of course, some beautiful works, and so we've had to adjust the name. There we are learning, performing, and analyzing works by Black composers, and then we're critically examining the history, nature, and trajectory of art song by Black composers. We're also investigating interlocking and simultaneous forms of oppression. And it would seem to me, based on the education that I received, often these ideas of oppression are not discussed when we talk about art song, but we do discuss them when we get to maybe Le Nozze di Figaro and talk about classism there. I want to make these visible in all of their aspects so that students have just a wide range of grounding and understanding how it impacts their lives inside and outside the music. And then with my next slide, I've joined the faculty of the, next slide please, of the Carey School of Business. And there I'm trying to model taking this research, which, as you can tell, in a lot of sense is also me-search, and making it applicable and making it practical to the wider world. So understanding voice as a technology of selfhood, which is often imagined as raced, and exploring and defining and accounting for the cognitive and sociological factors that integrate with that. And then also with leadership at the movies, this is a really fun project that I'm doing with them. And we're taking famous movies from Black cinema and distilling strategic themes. In this sense, we're just expanding the possibilities of what Blackness can mean and what it can represent, and how we can all interact with it in our lives. So, as you can see, a lot of my research is based in Blackness, but I open that up as a way to explore the world for all students. The Afro pessimist and futurist Fred Moten, he says that Black studies has a specific aim to try to save the earth. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And I think that it is an avenue for us to explore and expand the possibilities of music. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, very much. I'm incredibly grateful for all the work you've been doing here at Peabody, and also just want to say that before Carl arrived, this was something that heavily on the agenda at the Peabody Institute as a direct result of us being in the city in which Freddie Gray died in 2015. And so as a result, we were kind of starting to grapple with these issues, perhaps before some of our peers were in the sector, just because of our location. So we've been at this work for a few years, and I'm grateful to Carl for coming on board and being a real leader in all of this. So
my pleasure.
The next school that I wanted to hear from, I think, was Joyce. Is that correct? Are you next on my list?
I am. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Abra and the Peabody Institute for inviting me and the Manhattan School of Music to be a part of the panel discussion. I'm joining you today from the Manhattan School of Music on the traditional land of the Lenape and Wappinger, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. So I too have a short PowerPoint that I wanted to share with you just to contextualize our school for you. We're located in New York City at 122nd and Broadway. And as you'll see here, we're 3 buildings, all interconnected. So our students, even in the middle of winter, can wear flip-flops and shorts, even if there's a blizzard outside. We have a pre-college and a college, and approximately 500 of our 970 college students do live on campus in the tall building on the far right of your screen. I wanted to share with you a little bit about our student body. So if we could go to the next slide. We have a nearly 50-50 split of students who are male-female. And in the next slide, you'll also see that same approximation, especially in the graduate level for international to domestic students. And then as we go to the next slide and look at race, we actually find that between 30 and 40% of our students identify as non-white races or ethnic groups. So I thought that was important to contextualize where and who we are. As I thought about the comments for today, I wanted to focus on the 3 Ps: people, process, and practice, highlighting a few specific points along our journey over the last 3 years, including what we're doing now with the Black Creators Initiative and where we're headed. First, I want to say we have approached our work with intentionality. This is work that has to be done bit by bit. It's enduring and it's ever evolving. Everyone participates in cultural inclusion, from our trustees and senior leadership to students, faculty, and staff. We also recognize that for sustainable change to occur, it needs to be done incrementally, and you have to have representative voices at the decision-making table. So one other element about MSM and its leadership is we have an openly gay president, a female board chair, a Black female chief of staff, a Black CFO. My executive assistant is American-born, Mexican, Chinese. And among our senior leadership, 4 of the 12 members of the President's Council are men. I just want to underscore that 4 of the 12 members of our President's Council are men. So we really take diversity to heart in the leadership. And we've been working on the faculty side as well to increase, through recent hires, more women in traditionally male-dominated fields like jazz, and hiring Black and Asian faculty in departments with mostly white faculty. We're also expanding the diversity on our board as well. We absolutely have more work to do. I just want to underscore how important it is to start the work by creating more diversity and inclusion by building on what you already have in place. So the process, the first thing we recognized as we were doing this work is that we needed to build capacity for the conversation around diversity and cultural inclusion, our word that we use here to represent a lot of the DEI work. It's really through those conversations that we've been practicing and developing our vocabulary and changing how we approach conversations, where we've been able to make meaningful changes both broadly and specifically. With the start of our 5-year strategic planning process in the fall of 2018, we declared as an organizational imperative to address cultural inclusion with members from the entire community participating in the plan design. We discussed curriculum, diversity of faculty and faculty staff development, as well as choices around artistic programming, recruitment, and audition requirements. We also recently added gender pronouns to our signatures as a signal that MSM was a welcoming place for everyone, regardless of gender identity or fluidity. Now we use those pronouns more fluently, respecting our students, staff, and faculty preference in our meetings, conversations, and correspondence. In the fall of 2019 and early spring of 2020, our Chief of Staff, Alexis Smith, led students and faculty in our musical theater, contemporary performance program, and opera through discussions about their observations and desires to take action against systematic racism and cultural appropriation in works that were being studied or performed. We leaned into these difficult conversations rather than turning away from them. Since our discussions were already well underway and we were talking about how to expand the canon, diversifying the curriculum, we were thinking last year in the spring about the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, and we had identified 6 female artists as our honorary doctorates. So by this point, we've been on a journey for 18 months and building our vocabulary and practice of our dialogue on these important issues, specifically within the performing arts canon. When George Floyd was murdered and we entered this intense period of reckoning as a country and as a school, MSM's president, James Gandry, along with other members of the senior leadership, really felt an urgency to respond with more than just a message of solidarity. We were moved to take action and to accelerate the work that we had already put into place. So as a result, on May 31st, MSM announced its commitment to feature works by African American and African diaspora creators in every performance for the 2020-21 season. This commitment has permeated throughout the college and the pre-college. We rallied around our commitment to Black creators by supporting our community of Black students and faculty, holding town halls and creating the MSM Perspective series. And it was during this event that really set us on a path for this year, where one of our faculty members, Kelly Hall Tompkins, recalled an interaction with composer George Walker when he asked her to name Black composers who had written for the violin. And she couldn't, even as a classically trained musician with degrees from 2 conservatories, including MSM, and an active performance career. She noted, "My education was incomplete." And this has really hit us like a ton of bricks this year. It's been a hallmark. It's been a rallying call to us to think about reckoning and reconciliation as a conservatory situated in the US, adjacent to Harlem, that we have a moral responsibility to create a complete education. So we've kept doing the work. And in my final comments, I'll just share a few things of those aspects. We convened a working group of faculty and staff to support our faculty and students in identifying repertoire, building and linking resources on our library catalog to support our Black Creators Initiative. Nearly simultaneously, we launched a curriculum working group that has helped construct our cultural inclusion policy and examine our curriculum from a clean slate perspective. We're also addressing anti-racism and discrimination, making sure members of our community know where and to whom to reach out to, because like so many organizations last summer, we faced anonymous outcries on social media of harassment and discrimination and racism. MSM wanted to hear from our community directly, so we created the You Have a Voice portal in June of 2020, and that is overseen directly by the President's office. As we look ahead, I want to close with the work we're doing to our present and to pave our future. We practice conversations about cultural inclusion in meetings at every level of our organization. Our curriculum working group, created this past summer, helped launch the policy that I mentioned, and we have publicly stated our commitment, expectations, and assessment for ensuring a curriculum that is culturally inclusive, which permeates every aspect of our artistic and educational environment. And every department at MSM is currently creating student learning outcomes linked directly to our cultural inclusion. The next slide shows some of our student life experiences, which include community reads, cultural exchanges, and also our counseling staff, if we could go to the next slide, please, have been hosting events to support our students, BIPOC and AAPI. In the last slide, you'll see, coming back to intentionality, I just want to share how our Black Creators Commitment has already expanded the repertoire within a mostly white male canon. Just in performances alone, when we compared year to date between 2019 and now, we've gone from 9% of unique works performed by Black creator composers or librettists to 29% this year. And of the 345 works performed this year, 110 of them, or 32%, have included Black creators, contrasted by only 8% in the prior year. So in closing, I'd just like to again say this work is ongoing, it's ever evolving, and it takes people, a process, and practice. And it's gratifying to know the work we've been able to do, as well as to hear today from my colleagues at other schools. Thank you.
Joyce, thanks so very, very much. I know you've been doing a lot of good work up there. So thanks for sharing with us what some of that has been over the last few years. Christina, right down the street, what's happening at Juilliard in this space? I know you two have been very busy in the last couple of years.
Thanks so much. Christina, I use she, her pronouns. And I'm coming from my home in New Jersey, which is on the traditional land of the Lenape people. So I'm going to just talk to you all. I don't have any slides, but I wanted to sort of walk you through sort of what our process has been like. Specifically, even before my time, when President Damian Wetzel became president of the Juilliard School, he really named EDIB as a core pillar of what needed to be considered in sort of the holistic training of an artist as citizen. And so he named EDIB, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, which is the terminology that we use, or EDIB, as well as creative enterprise and those opportunities for collaboration and cross-interdisciplinary moments, as well as excellence, and sort of looking at how all of those things work with one another, and how sometimes even in the programming and processing of how we look at those pillars, how there's even competing truths within that. So I think it's important to take note of that as well. I just wanted to start off by listing out some of our values and our commitments, which have been really, really critical in helping to guide us as we further the work, because there's always work to be done. And as Joyce mentioned, I think she's absolutely right that it really is about people and the practice, really getting folks into the practice of what it means to really be looking at your day-to-day work from an EDIB and anti-racist lens. And so our commitments are really surrounded around building community, encouraging collaboration and innovation, fostering an inclusive and supportive and welcoming environment for all, endeavoring really to provide fair treatment, access, and opportunity for all of our community members, respecting and honoring diverse perspectives. We want to make sure that we are honoring those and embodying what that truly means, embracing challenges as opportunities for growth. I think sometimes in this work, we can become very, very overwhelmed. There are so many layers to this. And when you're trying to take an institution and move that institution forward, you have to think through those various nuances. And so I think it's really important to see those challenges as really opportunities to be with one another, to communicate with one another, and to find a way forward. And then again, continuing to embody our commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So when this was truly named as a pillar, there had been work that had been done prior to that. A lot of that had been in the space with students. And we have programming like a series called Diversity Dialogues, a diversity symposium that was really looking at opportunities to provide for students that could come together and to really dive into these various topics and also current events. I'll sort of circle back to how that has evolved just really in the past year. But really to start off, right before I came on board and they created my position, Juilliard went through a listening tour. And that listening tour was done in collaboration with Chanel Ward and Michael McElroy. And what they did was they took a subgroup of the community and they just facilitated honest conversations with them about what it what diversity, what equity, what inclusion, what belonging meant at Juilliard in that moment, and also tapped into the areas that really needed some focus. Out of that, what came was that there was these 4 critical topics. The first one being workshops for faculty and staff, and giving faculty and staff the tools to really engage in this dialogue in an intentional way and genuine way. Support systems for BIPOC students and international students was another key area. Curriculum and rep, as well as this broader sense of representation and belonging. So when I came on board, I was sort of handed this document and this report, and was able to work with Ward and McElroy to really think through what would a holistic program look like for the entire institution. And so we wanted to start off with the EDIB workshops. And what we did there was we worked with the consultants to develop something that was really for our community. And we created a task force to help us do that. And so that task force really was comprised of faculty and staff across the institution, individuals like the Dean and Director of Dance, the Dean and Director of the Drama Division, as well as the Provost. And so we brought all of these folks together, the Director of HR, the VP of Public Affairs, kind of the list goes on. And if you go to the website that's in the link, you'll be able to see the full list of task force members. But their initial task was to help us to create something that was not only providing the foundational information to our community, but really diving into what this meant within the context of Juilliard. So there were actual samples of things that had occurred in our community, and we discussed ways in which you might reconcile those moments and how we could move forward. In addition to that, we were also going through terminology because it seemed really critical for people to have that baseline so that they could engage in the dialogue. And that was really the preliminary task of the task force. We have launched that workshop. That workshop, we trained almost 90% of our community, and it is now being incorporated into the onboarding of all faculty and staff. And a module is being created online so that you can have a refresher in addition to a full scope of educational opportunities that will roll out next year. In addition to that, the task force, after completing that initial task of the workshops, we moved into strategic planning. And EDIB was named one of the 7 pillars of strategic planning. And the image that we often use is a weave, because EDIB was really found within all of the other pillars as well. What was important there was to review our offerings, was really to look at programming, align programming, identify gaps and challenges, then strategically assess the data that we had to then put forth a list of tactics that we could hopefully put into place and practice. In order to involve the community, because that's something I really, really value, I think it's really important to make sure you're hearing from all constituents and the folks that you're engaging. We created these working groups and these subgroups. So the task force sort of split up into smaller groups, and then we welcomed in additional members of the community to discuss these core areas. So really looking at the student life cycle and also considering what it meant to broaden and deepen recruitment, to expand our preparatory education programming, as well as community engagement, to improve financial support for students from underrepresented backgrounds, and really to make productive internal and external EDIB investments. Following that, we come into the summer months, and as Joyce mentioned, and the racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we wanted to be sure that we were really actively listening to our community. What we identified was that although there were opportunities to communicate out and to communicate in, there was not enough transparency in that, and that was really key. And one of the things that we put into place is on our website. You can really find all of everything I'm really telling you today right there on our website, as well as messages that we've sent out to the community, just so that it can all be out in the open. We wanted to show that we were really committed to this. In addition to that, we needed to develop a broader range, very similar to what Joyce mentioned, of reporting and resolution procedures for bias incidents and response, as well as prevention. So that was another key area that came out, as well as increasing the learning opportunities for individuals in the anti-racism space, as well as EDIB. So what we did there is, following multiple conversations, and we had many community sessions, we received a lot of feedback through multiple ways. We decided to launch 2 working groups that were comprised of faculty, staff, and students. those working groups are set up with very specific tasks. So one working group has looked at educational opportunities, and the other working group has looked at bias response and prevention. And they've collaborated across the academic year and have come up with really a recommendation on a best way to move forward. And so for the workshops, we're really looking at a holistic set of offerings, everything from gender expression in the classical art forms, like when we're thinking about ballet and things of that nature, to being sure that we understand how to create a generative working space and rehearsal space. And if microaggressions were to come up, how might you navigate those moments? So it's really a long list of opportunities. We've also worked to incorporate modules of EDIB within first year experience, orientation, and additional student opportunities that go alongside of our diversity dialogue series that I mentioned earlier, as well as the symposium. Another key thing to really point out was this need to sometimes gather our community in response to the current events that were happening. And what we've done in those cases is we typically offer, most recently for our Asian American, and Pacific Islander community, we offered a space where they could come together that was facilitated by community members that was really meant to be a sharing and a healing space. But we've coupled that also with historical, educational, and opportunities so that folks can also come and learn more and hear from our community. We thought it was really critical to get that historical piece in, because what we're finding is that, as we all know, we're not taught a lot of this in our education. And so we wanted people, again, to have that context to be able to understand and to empathize in these moments. The last thing I'll mention is I won't go into too much detail into each division and department, but everyone is taking this on in very nuanced ways that reflect what is necessary within their expertise. So as an example, for the dance division, there's been a lot of conversations around dance history, music studies, and pedagogy, and really looking at gender identity and inclusive language. In the drama division, there is a drama anti-racism working group that has, it's composed of actors, playwrights, and faculty. And we're sort of looking at the whole division and areas in which we can offer recommendations for moving forward. In the music division, as an example, studio faculty and staff created the Music by Black Composers, an introductory resource guide. And that was really a community moment where people came together, they gathered, and they discussed recommendations to be included into this, as well as ways in which it could be incorporated into both the, sorry, I'm losing my words here, the admissions process, as well as curriculum. And then in the preparatory division, really looking for the synergies in our music advancement program, our pre-college program, partnering with external partners, and what that means for looking at the full pathway or pipeline. So really, there's so much work that is still needs to be done. But what really excites me is that we're at this moment where there's a lot of community organization happening, and there's a lot of community engagement where folks are really coming together, we're listening to one another, and we're really trying to find best ways for us to keep taking those steps forward by acknowledging the history and the past as well.
Christina, thank you so much. So I invited the three of you as representatives from your specific institutions because I know that there is so very much work going on within all of these schools. I want to turn to Derek now. Derek, there have been any number of ways in which this work has been described or called out or contextualized, and really the language around all of this in and of itself seems to be changing. Can you speak to what is driving these changes and how institutions can remain responsive to these changes in this, this kind of movable landscape in which we find ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And the language, I find the linguistic framework is super important. And, I work with organizations, not only conservatories, but schools and businesses. And even within the conservatory world, we're hearing EDI, EDIB, DNI, ADI, QQQ, right? And folks they're confused, to be quite honest. And even within organizations, I have found that there isn't even shared understandings around what those terms mean. particularly I found that post George Floyd, that there has been a conflation of DEI and anti-racism. And people see the two as being the same, when in fact anti-racism would fall under the DEI umbrella, but they're quite different. And I believe that strategically, often individuals are choosing certain framings because of some of the challenges, quite frankly, with the word diversity. And I have a TEDx talk where I speak directly to this, that the word diversity is often in organizations serving as a proxy for historically marginalized groups in a way that I find it often becomes a double-edged sword, because people are having different understandings of it. Therefore, there are different understandings of who's included. There's different understandings as to who benefits from it. There are different understandings of, can I be included in this work if I am white, if I am male, if I am Christian, if I am straight, if I'm part of a dominant group? Can I be included in this work, or is my role to sit here and not contribute, or to resist, or to feel as if my role is to be shamed or guilted in organizations that are overwhelmingly not diverse in the way that we typically use the word. So you have structurally, you're undermining yourself before you even get out of the gates, right? I've seen a number of organizations say, we're so proud this year we're 33% diverse, and then they say everyone come to the diversity meeting. Well, those two can't hold together, right? You're 33%, who have you quantified as being different, and who is the normative group, right? And so I've seen this a number of times, even with the best of intentions, just the framing is off. Also in our conservatories, and I know that on this call, we have people from Canada, we have people from Brazil, and in our conservatories, even situated in the United States, we have international communities, and often the term diversity outside the United States doesn't resonate, period. Or if it does resonate, it resonates in a very different way. So what does it mean for an international faculty or staff member, an international student, to come into a US context where this term diversity is being used, and now I'm being classified as a person of color? What does that mean? I have no idea, right? So there is a linguistic work that needs to be done organizationally, first to have some shared understandings of what these terms mean, and certainly I think to decouple sort of diversity from meaning underrepresented or historically marginalized folks, and really have diversity mean differences. So I always say all folks are included in diversity. So then some people say, oh, great, so we don't need to have this conversation, or right, it's, all conservatories matter. No, the challenge is that not all of these identities or backgrounds are equally valued in our society. This is not to get into identity politics. I'm not arguing that identity is destiny, right? However, we know from statistics, right, that being a male or being a woman or being transgender in this country are going to inform different outcomes, right? Being Black or being white or being Asian or being multiracial is going to inform different outcomes. So having a sense of that then creates the compelling reason as to why we must engage in inclusion as well. We recognize that we all have backgrounds and perspectives. We recognize that in the world, and we have quantitative and qualitative and empirical data that finds that these differences are not neutral. So then what can we do within our conservatories to ensure that no matter where you're coming from, that you're going to have an opportunity, equal access to opportunity? And the enactment of diversity and inclusion is equity. It's the most simple way I can think of it, because there's a lot of convoluted definitions around these terms. So diversity, representation, and differences, inclusion, being valued, your work is valued, you're seen, you're heard, and equity, the work of enacting diversity and inclusion. And then anti-racism would fall under that umbrella. And I think the most simple definition I like to use, without getting political, without getting convoluted, is recognizing, identifying that racism is real, and an intentionality around dismantling it, right? In attitudes, in behaviors, that's great at the interpersonal level, but also in structures, in practices, in policies. And for a conservatory, that includes our repertoire and the canon and curriculum and pedagogical orientations as well. That's what anti-racism is, full stop, right? So I think if you can get people to acknowledge that racism exists, then the question is, do you want to be part of making a more inclusive conservatory? If the answer is yes, then you're on board with anti-racism, right? And then what does that look like?
So Derek, we've heard from our colleagues about what that looks like in their particular institutions and how that's kind of playing out. You work with other high-level music schools, conservatories, arts organizations, corporate sector. Could you maybe discuss for us at a 30,000-foot level what you see really as the initiatives that are moving the needle on this work, and what are the things that are the initiatives or the things that are really helping to move this along, and what are those challenges, and where do you continue to see opportunities in this?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have 5 hours for this answer, correct?
We have at least 5 hours.
Okay, terrific. One of the challenges, I believe, is just what we just mentioned. I think was important, that question around the linguistic framing. Super important. I think another challenge that I'm seeing, not only in conservatories, but across sectors as well, is that for many, there's a pre-George Floyd and there's a post-George Floyd, right? The pre-George Floyd, many conservatories were focused solely on numbers, student numbers. Many were looking at how many Black students do I have? How many Latino students do I have? And I'm being really specific in my framing, right? Because many were not including native-born AAPI folks, and many were not also, or they were fluffing up their diversity numbers with international folks as well. That was largely the focus. George Floyd, there was this awakening, right, as there should have been, and an opportunity and a challenge is that many recognize we have lots more to do. Is much more comprehensive than looking solely at our student numbers, which is important. But in doing so, there were challenges around the necessary urgency with moving forward, and folks moving far too quickly for the organization to be able to absorb the change. So they've gone from doing very little to now pulling out all of the stops all at once during a global pandemic, right? And surprised that there's pushback from everyone, right? You're going too fast, you're going too slow, I can't absorb it, you want me to change? I've been teaching this curriculum like this forever. I don't know any Black composers. What about the Asian folks? We want to talk about transgender. You're not doing this, you're not. There wasn't a container to absorb the change management, right? There wasn't a container. So I think that all of these issues are important, certainly, but there's also a structural piece as to how much can an organization withstand at once. I'm a person of color who had a conservatory experience. Trust me, I know what's going on, right? I was a faculty member at independent schools. I lecture at Ivy League schools. I know the issues from a perspective of a person of color, certainly, and from other groups as well. I also know as a consultant, the readiness that is required for an organization to sustain change in a way that addresses what can be, I think, framed as short-term, sort of, these are low-hanging fruit we need to get to, and begin to plant the seeds for more sustainable change as well. And so I've seen many organizations, again, with the best of intent, try to do everything at once when it isn't part of the capacity of many of our leaders, right? We weren't trained to have a background in diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency, and race, and gender, and socioeconomics, and change management, right? The boards had largely not engaged in this work pre-George Floyd as well, and then being presented with well-drafted and credible and legitimate and researched strategies and demands that need to make the school better, but not having the capacity to absorb it in a meaningful way, right? And then many of our conservatories just didn't have the infrastructure while navigating a pandemic as well. So it's not suggesting one or the other, but there has to be a meaningful reconciliation of the both in a way that meets the right now need and also is sustainable. It also strikes me that after George Floyd, we were all, as we should have been, many were recognizing racism, many were recognizing anti-Blackness, whereas we've also had long-standing AAPI racism in our country. It's not new. It's not new. And even as this continues with the high visibility incidents we've seen in San Francisco, we've seen in New York City, we've seen all over the country, that we're still not seeing our conservatories really, and this is our largest, if we look at our conservatories, in most of our conservatories, this is our largest BIPOC group, right? And we're not seeing the types of initiatives and efforts and naming and centering that we're seeing for this group that we saw for Black, and I'm Black, right? I'm saying this. So there's also an equity piece there as well. So the bullet points are opportunities and challenges. There's the reconciling the need to do something and the capacity, so the readiness for your organization. There's the creating the common language, I think is important. As Christina mentioned, there is the interacting with individuals to understand their sense of belonging and using that to inform then the strategy towards moving forward, and not to confine this to activities and tactics. I want to learn about Florence Price. I love her music, but just learning about Florence Price is not going to necessarily make the systemic changes that we're going to need to improve the experiences of Black students. Right?
So Derek, I am curious, and again, we at Peabody have been working on this for a while. I would agree with you. Structurally, in a global pandemic this year, I turn to my colleagues on this panel. I think we would all agree that moving this work forward has been incredibly important, and we have all been eager to do it. But you're right, it's been a lot, and yet we've all been engaged in this work for a few years and starting to build that foundation. I know other institutions who really just started to lean in on this after the murder of George Floyd. What are maybe 1, 2, 3 things tops that you would tell an organization who is just beginning this work, given everything you said about the situation? Where would you suggest they begin this process?
Yeah, I think one way to begin first is to listen. So before you jump into implementing best practices, before you go into sort of tactical mode, would be to get a sense of how individuals are self-reporting and describing their sense of belonging, to get a sense of what they understand is going well, and get a sense also of what they understand are growth areas. These are small focus groups. These are anonymous surveys as well. If people understand that you are truly meaning to do something with what they're sharing, I think I've found that they're willing to engage in the process. I think the second piece is to begin to connect this work around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, anti-racism to the value proposition of the conservatory. Because often people are seeing this as discrete from what the real work is. This is, I came here to play violin. I came here to make beautiful, baritone sounds. And now you're talking about this diversity and inclusion stuff. This is taking away from academic excellence. Someone said this earlier, right? People seeing this work as antithetical to academic excellence. So connecting this with whatever the value proposition is of the conservatory, connecting it to that. And then the second thing I think you can do is to assess readiness of the conservatory for change while also building capacity. Building capacity at the student level, the faculty staff level, the administrative and the board level, of just some fundamental workshops around what it is we're talking about, some terms, and also grounding this work. And I don't know if anyone named this specifically, grounding this work, not only in academic excellence, but in empathy, right? And I'm gonna use a very scholarly definition that we use at Sesame Street, which is understanding and caring about the feelings of others, right? And as musicians, right, if I am feeling with the pianist, I'm feeling with the orchestra, that certainly is something we can tap into, right? This idea of not only there's a cognitive piece around perspective taking, but there's an effective piece as well, that I get that person's perspective, but I care about how that person is feeling excluded. And that is what drives and sustains inclusion.
Thank you so much. There are a couple of good questions that have come out of the chat and the Q&A that I'd like to toss out to all of you. One of our participants asked, how is ableism being addressed in arts training in any of your institutions? And then I would also open that to Derek as well to ask, how he's seeing that playing out across the sector. I would say I don't have a good answer for that at Peabody. Derek, sorry, go ahead.
I would say that when I frame this work, we look at what we call we recognize that we all have many different forms of backgrounds, different forms of identity, right? And that we often talk about the big eight, the big eight being those forms of identity that are going to be particularly salient in informing your life chances, right? This is not putting you in a box. This is not saying this is all that you are, but this is saying that when you walk out on the street and you are driving in your car, or you're going to post a letter, or you're trying to buy health insurance, or you want to get married, that these are going to be important factors to take into account as you're thinking about how you're going to interact with and be perceived by institutions. Gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomics, physical and mental ability. So ableism and neurodiversity, we talk about in our workshops. And in the arts, certainly we're looking at dance, someone mentioned, right? Certainly in voice, right? I have a good friend from Oberlin, Abra, your friend as well, a tenor who is looking at a body image in the operatic field. It's something that we're very much a part of. Lookism, ageism is grounded in the work that we're engaging in. So I like to say, because some people say it's not only about race. Hey, it is about race, and including these other issues as well.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time. I wish this conversation could go on for hours, actually. I am sorry it can't today. There's a great question in the Q&A from Stanford Thompson, actually. Hi, Stan. About what the future looks like for each of our institutions. And I'd like to also ask you, what are your biggest concerns about the work of the next steps in each of your respective institutions? And I'll go in the same order that we went before. And then Derek, I'll have you kind of maybe sum that up. And then I think we'll unfortunately be at the end of our time. So if you each can take about a minute and talk about what next steps look like and concerns about next steps. Carl?
Well, I think my colleagues have described just a wonderfully iterative process with very multifaceted, which really excites me. And right now at Peabody, we are in the test phase for a lot of these ideas, or in the prototyping phase, trying to figure out exactly what would be the best way to deliver them and to implement them. I am really heartened by the idea that as musicians, we are uniquely positioned to listen, to understand nuance, to make adjustments, and to persist because of the training that we have all benefited from at our respective institutions. I'm also inspired by the fact that as teachers, we constantly adjust our teaching methods for each student that walks in the door so that we can create very tailored instructions. And I think that as those of us working in this DEI or ADEI space, we can also show that sense of relevance and that sense of responsiveness so that we can continue to do this work and continue to really tailor it to the individual needs of our students, our classes, and our institutions.
Thank you. Joyce?
So thoughtful and thought-provoking, everything that's been said today. From the Manhattan School of Music's perspective, I'll say just a few points. One is we opted not to create a task force or a committee. We've really done the groundwork, just holding meetings and open workshops that our whole community and then segments of our community, whether that be faculty or students or staff, have been invited into. And that is something that we think now our community is ready for. So we really were assessing where are we, what's authentic to us as an organization. And likely that will be something that we look forward towards next year. Really grounding this work into the curriculum. I've shared with my faculty and colleagues here that I don't think it's enough to simply add a class. This has to be deep permeating work for it to take root. And so we're really looking at how and where does cultural inclusion show up in the curriculum and the student experience throughout the entire career or journey of a degree program or a diploma. And the last thing I'll say, truthfully, honestly, is the level of exhaustion that everyone is feeling, and really being able to help continue the work moving forward, and letting everyone have an opportunity to recognize and appreciate the work that has been done this year, given that so much of it has had to manifest in these screens and not as visible perhaps as it might otherwise be if we had been able to gather in person.
Thank you, Joyce. Christina?
Just have to agree that there's been so many intentional thoughts here, and I just appreciate being in such great company. But I think for us, what's really next is we've done a lot with our working groups and our task force in assessing where we are and really making that plan of recommendations for a way forward. And that's really specifically looking at policy and practice. An example of that is the non-discrimination and harassment policy, and what are ways in which we are really finding the sustainable changes at our institution in our approaches. So that's just one example and something I'm very excited for. We're embarking on an educational campaign to make sure our community is well aware of the policy. The policy underwent revisions based on what the community, based on community feedback from the working group. And we're also training bias deputies in restorative justice practices, and really looking at how do we create the environment that we're hoping for here in terms of, you know, that call-in culture, and really finding ways in which we can support one another. So that's a really critical part of this, in addition to just the continued learning and listening that is necessary. I really do like to describe this as a practice. It's something that we need to be doing every day in everything that we're thinking about, and really getting folks to the point where they're comfortable in that and they're comfortable with being uncomfortable is really key for us. So I think that those continued discussions and dialogues and educational opportunities will be key too.
Thank you. Derek, I'll give you the final last word. We're right at 1 o'clock, but if everyone will just hang with us, we'll be done in just a moment. Derek?
Great, I'll be brief. Just very appreciative to be in dialogue with everyone. Carla, I really appreciate your point around if anyone is strategically positioned to do this work, it is folks in the conservatory, right? If we can discern the difference between a wobble and a fast vibrato, or A440 and Baroque pitch, we can certainly be attuned to the emotions of others. And Joyce, I appreciate the idea also of the intentionality that you mentioned as well. and not having a task force, but really just integrating this into the systems. And Christina, I really just appreciated the tactics that you were just rattling off, from restorative justice and all of these other plans that you have, and specific activities to move forward the objectives. I would just end and synthesizing. Professor Livingston out of Harvard talks about a roadmap to this work. He calls it PRESS. The P is problem awareness, and everyone has mentioned this, thinking about what is the problem that needs to be solved, not the symptoms. The R is then the root cause analysis, and everyone talked about the process they went through in going to this. The third is empathy, and everyone has spoken in some ways to this idea, is, do I care enough about the problem, and do I care enough about the people that it harms, right? Empathy. Then there's a strategy around it, so that's the S. Beyond the hopes and prayers, what specific outcomes do we have? What does the roadmap look like? What is accountability? Not accountability in the way we use in public discourse, like I got you, but accountability and how do we come together to support each other to realize these goals that we have collaboratively designed? And then there may the last S is sacrifice. The sacrifice is it's going to look different. It's probably going to take more time. We're not going to be able to do the things that we've always done in the same way that we've done them. But the result is that we're going to better live the mission of our organizations. And so in the long run, this is about sustainability.
Dr. DuPont, Dr. Griggs, Dr. Gay, Christina, thank you all from the bottom of my heart for engaging in this conversation today. You've given us all a lot to think about, and I am very grateful for your collegiality and your constant ideas and big thinking that all of you engage in. And I look toward all of you as leaders in this field, and I'm grateful for this conversation today. By my count, this is the 23rd Peabody Lunch and Learn that we have held over the last year. I have to tell all of you that it has been an absolute labor of love from all parties. I am proud to say that we have had incredible guest presenters. We've had McCarthy Genius Award winners and Pulitzer Prize winners and real thinkers and leaders in our field, from faculty members through to administrators and consultants and the like. And to a person, no one has gotten paid. Everyone has donated their time for the love of the field and to make the field better. And I am eternally grateful to all of those who have participated. I want to especially thank the Peabody staff who have helped us through this whole thing. Adam Scalici, Anna Harris, Robin McGinnis, Christina Mansior, folks from the marketing team that have been tremendously helpful, as well as our academic technology instructional design staff. Thank you all.